Hi everyone, welcome to this short explanation video to help you understand, hopefully, how conservatives or where conservatives agree and disagree over human nature. So today we're going to be looking at how, generally speaking, conservatives feel that they have a very pessimistic view of human nature. They argue that people are flawed, that they're incapable of reaching a state of perfection. So they're very different to liberals and socialists who argue that actually humans can improve. There are steps and measures that can be put in place to help humans maybe not become perfect, but at least improve themselves. Conservatives disagree with that. They also argue that human nature remains constant. It doesn't change. From this, they argue that humans need to be kept in check because humans are capable of being evil. And lastly, as we will see today, we're going to be looking at the three ways in which humans are imperfect. So we're going to be looking at how humans are psychologically imperfect. That is to say that they are limited and dependent creatures. So we'll talk about who they're dependent on and why they're limited. Secondly, conservatives argue that humans are imperfect because they're morally imperfect. They are selfish. They are greedy. And lastly, we're going to be looking at how conservatives argue that humans are intellectually imperfect. We don't have the capacity to understand the world around us. So let's break those three down then and talk about where conservatives agree and disagree on those three key areas. So starting off then with how humans are psychologically imperfect. Conservatives argue that humans crave safety from, looking at the top left-hand corner there, from their parents. They crave familiarity, security. They want to know what their place is in society. And so we don't just crave safety and familiarity and security from our parents, but also from our teachers or just simply the classroom we're in. We like to know that we've got the same teacher day in, day out, week in, week out, the same classroom. We don't like change. We don't like it when we're asked to change even the seat that we normally sit in, or perhaps work with people that we haven't worked with before. We crave familiarity. It's comfortable. We know how that will work if we work with that person again. We crave security. You've got that picture of 10 Downing Street at the bottom left-hand corner there. We crave security from the government. We want to know that the government is in control of the situation. No matter what that situation might be, we want to know what they're doing about the situation, that they've got it in hand, that they're following advice, that they've got rules in place. And we want to know what our position in society is. We want to be surrounded by a friendship group that understand us, we understand them, we understand what our role is in that friendship group, who we can turn to when we need comforting, who we can turn to when we need advice, and in return, how we can help other people too. So pretty much all conservatives believe in this idea of psychological human imperfection. They argue that, certainly traditional conservatives and One Nation conservatives argue that liberty or freedom brings with it choice, change, uncertainty, and humans are unsettled by that. Think about when you move school. Think about when you go from school to university. Think about when you change job or if you move home. Freedom, the ability to choose, is greatly unsettling. So for this reason, conservatives, generally speaking, support Thomas Hobbes's argument that we need order. Order needs to come before freedom. By order, we mean, of course, hierarchy. We need to know where we are in society. So we need to know that we've got parents, that we've got teachers, that we've got the government, that we've got friends in place to provide that order. And that order must come before freedom. Now, the reason why he argues that, you might remember that Thomas Hobbes talks about, well, if we don't have order, then we're in the state of nature, a state of all against all, a state where there is eternal conflict, because we're all selfish creatures. We're all competing against one another. So we need order first, and then we can be allowed freedom. So this society, these social groups like friendship groups, your class, provide us as individuals with a sense of security, a sense of purpose. Otherwise, we fall into a position of anomie, A-N-O-M-I-E. That is a condition of instability, a breakdown of society, a breakdown of values, because we lack purpose, we lack ideals. Our purpose and our ideals come from the values that are given to us by our friends, from education, from our parents, from the government. And we need to act on those responsibilities, those bonds that those values give us. If we don't, then we fall into a state of atomism, an atomistic society where we're all just a bunch of individuals. Now, this is where the conflict starts, because neoliberals actually do believe that we live in an atomistic society. And if we don't, at least we should. So neoliberals are very much classical liberals. They believe that society is made up of self-interested, self-sufficient individuals. So they argue that anything in society that tries to act in a paternal way, like a father figure, like a parent, actually is damaging us as individuals. So attempts, for example, by the government to introduce welfare services, to redistribute income, say through taxation, undermine our rights, our freedoms, our property rights. So people like Robert Nozick, for example, argue that we work hard and we are rewarded for that work. Our freedom, our rights are intertwined with the money that we make. That's how we are rewarded. That's why we are self-sufficient, because we know that we need to rely on ourselves. That property that we get through our work, whether it be through that property might be the money that we make, or it might be our homes or whatever, that, Robert Nozick argues, can't be simply transferred from one person to the other without our say-so. So by taxing us and taxing our revenue to give to schools or to hospitals or to any other state's program is basically legalized state robbery. Now, this is based on a view of individualism, that the individual doesn't owe anything to society. Society doesn't owe anything to the individual. So this very much goes against the idea that humans are psychologically imperfect, because they believe that actually humans are maybe not perfect, but they are capable, they are reasonable, they're rational, they're self-sufficient, or at least they should be. They shouldn't be dependent creatures. They shouldn't be dependent on their parents, their teachers, their friends, certainly not the government. So we move on now to how humans are morally imperfect. Conservatives argue that humans crave things. Humans are naturally selfish and greedy. We compare ourselves against others. We compare the car that we have, or perhaps don't have, to the car that somebody else has. We compare our home against other people's homes. We compare the phone that we have against the phones that other people have. And this happens from a very young age. Even simply the attention that one person might get compared to you. So conservatives argue that from this, criminal or antisocial behaviour is because we are selfish creatures. It's not because of economic disadvantage or social disadvantage. It's because we are imperfect creatures. We're morally imperfect. So we need authority in our lives. We need authority figures in our lives to keep us on the straight and narrow, whether that be friends, parents, whoever that might be. We need authority figures in our lives. Now, traditional conservatives and One Nation conservatives argue that from this we need paternalistic figures, father figures. That's what paternalism means. And this is the idea that basically, particularly One Nation conservatives, argue that we need a government that is equipped to lead and guide us. And this comes from the traditional conservative idea that the people who are in positions of power are there by virtue of their birth. They've inherited that position, and they have that position because of their upbringing. They have been born to rule, just like the middle class has been born, well, sort of born to generate money, and the working class have been born to work. Now, this authority operates in a top-down manner for traditional conservatives and One Nation conservatives as well. So we need the upper class who are born into that position to rule. We need the middle class to generate wealth, create jobs, and we need the working class to do the work, to do the manual labour, to create products. So that authority is top down. We need leaders, we need employers, we need managers, we need parents, we need friends, we need teachers. Now, as I say, One Nation paternalism is a little bit different maybe to traditional conservatism. They believe that there needs to be government regulation. So, for example, there needs to be government regulation to make sure that people don't work too many hours, that where people work is safe, to make sure that that people's homes are safe as well. They also believe in social welfare measures too, that people should be educated. Maybe the state will have a role in that. The reason for this, though, is to keep that authority in place. They worry that if the poorest, the least advantaged in society, if they don't have protections in place by the government, then we will have a rich nation and a poor nation. And the less fortunate need a society where they are looked after. Otherwise, chaos, rioting, protests will result. Now, the conflict here starts because neoliberals reject paternalism. This is the classical liberal, neoliberal, libertarian wing of the New Right. They argue that humans should be guided by an idea of self-sufficiency, self-reliance, self-help. So they reject the idea that there should be welfare programs in place. So they reject the idea that humans need guidance, that there should be rules in place, that there should be rules in place that govern the workplace, that there should be rules in place that tell you how many hours you can work, that there should be rules in place or maybe benefits in place to help certain people, like job seekers allowance, for example. The reason for this is they argue that this promotes a dependency culture where individuals become dependent on other people. It undermines our freedom. It undermines capitalism. It undermines the free market. Again, think back to what Ayn Rand and Robert Nozick argued. They argue that humans have freedoms and rights, and the idea that the government can take your property, can take your money through taxation and give it to someone else is like legalized theft. It also offends people like Ayn Rand because it works on the premise that the government knows how to spend your money. It works on the premise that you are not a rational individual. And that's why libertarians, neoliberals, reject the ideas of paternalism. They reject the idea that somehow someone above you knows better than you how to live your life. Before we move on, it's also worth talking about the other wing in the New Right, the neoconservative wing. They're much more authoritarian than, say, neoliberals or one nation conservatives. They want to strengthen society by having strong authority and social discipline. That's why neoconservatives very often want to put measures in place to keep marriage, for example, as an important idea. They will put measures in place to encourage people to stay married, for example, or encourage people to value the idea of marriage. They will very often also believe in sort of this authoritarian idea of paternalism as well, that paternalism is there should be strong law and order, that the role of law and order and authority figures is to keep people on the straight and narrow. They might very often encourage longer prison sentences or advocate the idea that prison works as a deterrent. Now, the last thing for us to look at then is the idea that humans are intellectually imperfect. And here it's worth talking about the ideas of traditional conservatives like Thomas Hobbes and this man here, Michael Oakeshott. So they argue that humans are unable to interpret the world around them. And when they do try to interpret the world around them, it's very often distorted by their greed, their self-interest. We need to understand the world around us through what Hobbes called empiricism, real-world experience, not abstract theories like socialism, liberalism, freedom, rights, equality. Those are ideas. We need to try and understand the world around us through experience. So let's talk about Oakeshott then. Oakeshott argues that humans and the world around us, society around us, is unpredictable and complex. Humans can't understand it then through abstract theories or principles like equality, like freedom, like rights. This, he argues, inevitably leads to an attempt to simplify things. It leads to attempts to organise a world through ideas. And this, he argues, unfortunately leads to Stalin and Soviet communism, or Hitler and National Socialism and that sort of far right. Because humans in those examples have tried to understand the world through abstract theories rather than empiricism or experience. So conservatives, traditional conservatives, one nation conservatives like Michael Oakeshott, prefer pragmatism. They argue that because humans lack the ability to reason and understand the world around us, that we need to use pragmatism, experience. We can't use ideas or theories to explain or improve our life and develop society. That actually the ideas of rights or classless society, if you're going to talk about Stalin and Soviet communism, or ideas of a reordering of society, if you want to talk about Hitler and Nazi socialism, National Socialism, because all of those examples, Oakeshott argues, actually led to a worse result rather than better conditions. So instead, we need to draw on tradition. We need to think about our history. We need to think about our practical experience to try and understand our place in the world. And from that, that's how we should govern ourselves, rather than through revolution, evolution. Now, this is where the disagreement comes in. We now look at the New Right. Let's look at the liberal New Right first, the neoliberal New Right. They argue that, yes, humans are selfish, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because humans are rational. Humans should be allowed to pursue their own interests in their own way. They very much believe in the individual. They very much believe that humans should be free to reach their potential. And if everyone as individuals are out there in a self-interested way trying to reach their own potential, then that will be sort of a natural harmony, because it's not in our interests to violate somebody else's self-interest, because we know that in the long run that will create disorder, chaos, that will create a negative effect for us in the long run. So we may even go further and talk about libertarians like Robert Nozick, who argue that actually we have rights, and we have rights to freedom, and the state should have very little role in our lives. What we're talking about here is actually a rejection of Michael Oakeshott, that actually neoliberals are very much governed by philosophy, theories. These neoliberals are governed by theories about rights and freedom. That the primary role of the state is to protect those rights. So Michael Oakeshott actually would have many misgivings about the ideas of neoliberals, because they are governed by theories, governed by abstract principles, not experience. Similarly, he would have a problem with neoconservatives within the New Right as well, because he would argue that they are governed by theories and principles too. Now, there is some agreement though with neoconservatives, because neoconservatives also want to try and uphold tradition too, history as well, because neoconservatives argue that otherwise we're making choices in a permissive way. Certainly, neoliberals talk about permissiveness and would believe in permissiveness, that individual humans know what is right and what is wrong for them. Neoliberals disagree with neoconservatives disagree with neoliberals. They reject permissiveness. They reject this idea that neoliberals have, that humans should be able to make their own moral choices. They say that there is no right and wrong that an individual can decide for themselves. So here we come then to people like Ayn Rand, Robert Nozick, and how ultimately we have this big disagreement between conservatives. On the left there, you've got people like Michael Oakeshott, people like Thomas Hobbes, who argue that humans are limited creatures who can't really understand the world around them, who need to change things in a pragmatic, gradual way based on our experience. But on the right there, you've got neoliberals like Ayn Rand and Robert Nozick, who say, actually, we need to be governed by our reason. We do have our own rights and freedoms, and we know what is in our own interests. So neoliberals are guided by theories and principles. Michael Oakeshott would feel very uneasy with that idea. Now, hopefully you found this video useful, but do let me know if you have any questions about anything that we have discussed here, about how conservatives agree, where conservatives agree and disagree on the idea of human nature.